It's important to be able to sit down at a family dinner or even individually with your kids. And, we are observers. We observe things in their life. And if it's appropriate to have the conversation at the family table, you say that, hey, let's talk about, this issue that's coming up in our world today. And what do we think about this? And it's not us sitting down and lecturing our children and giving them the information that they need to file away. No, it's a discussion so that they're involved and they're thinking it through, and we can say, okay, that's an interesting point. Why would you say that? And where does that come from? Where does the Bible back you up in that, in the way you're thinking? So that it's a productive conversation that helps them solidify where they are.
Welcome to CLF Conversations, where we tackle the joys and challenges of parenting with biblical wisdom, a whole lot of prayer, and maybe just a little bit of secondhand embarrassment from your teenager. Today, we're diving into discipline for ages 13 to 18, also known as the years of mood swings, eye rolls, and sudden realization that you, as a parent, know absolutely nothing, or so they think. So grab your coffee, buckle up, and let's talk about guiding these almost adults with truth and grace, at least before you start charging them rent. Alrighty, CLF, so we have once again another episode of CLF Conversations with you. I am myself, Perry Sorensen, and then up here we have some usuals to the podcast. We have
David York.
Jill York.
That was so subtle. So quiet. So today, if you haven't already...
people define me as quiet.
Some quiet. Has anybody defined you ever as quiet?
No.
Never.
Never. Yeah, never.
So here's the title for today. Drum roll. Eye rolls and Ephesians. Discipline for ages 13 to 18. Let's dive into this. So obviously we're talking about discipline for ages 13 to 18.
Actually, the people on the podcast right now can see Jill and I staring at the back of your head with just eye rolls and Ephesians.
What
is eye rolls and Ephesians?
The eye rolls are just coming from the guests here on the podcast.
That's exactly.
Yeah,
right.
I can do that. I can roll my eyes, Barry.
So, well, let's hop into it. Just as we're going through this series, we've given a generalization over what discipline looks like for parenting and what that role entails. Then we've also got into 0 to 5. Then we went into kind of your 6 to 12 age. Now we're into that 13 to 18 range. For just to speed everybody up, in case they haven't heard the other podcast. Dave, can you give us your Calvary analogy again?
Yes, not original. So let's just make sure it's clear with everybody.
It's copyrighted.
That's right. I don't have too many original thoughts. But we heard it explained one time that when you're parenting, 0 to 5 is like you're out Mount Sinai and you're kind of laying the law down. You're giving the kids like what obedience, the blessings of obedience, the consequences of disobedience. And then ages 6 to 12-ish you're starting to take them to Mount Calvary, where they're starting to realize that they just can't obey the Lord and they realize their sin. And then ages 13 to 18, kind of you start entering that Paul and Timothy world where you're starting to walk alongside them. Mm-hmm. And obviously the older they get, the more alongside you become, so that was kind of the way it was explained to us. It was really helpful to kind of breaking it down of how we parent.
Definitely. It's super helpful. So along those lines, can we talk about how does biblical discipline shift in the teenage years? Us coming from that 6 to 12 range. Now, what does it look like at 13 to 18?
Well, I think that, as we talked about before, biblical discipline begins with training. So 0 to 5, you're doing a lot of training. 6 to 12, you're beginning to kind of, little Johnny or little Sarah, they know what the rules are and they've disobeyed them. And so you're going to enter into some more, some stronger discipline. That's where, he who spareth the rod spoils the child and those kind of things come in. When you get into 13 to 18, you're really beginning to have them navigate through the why reasons of their sin. And you're trying to get down to the heart to help them understand and begin to do some self-discipline. Because the goal of discipline and the goal of them growing is that they become people that begin to discipline themselves. we had that little song. What was that little song you say, baby? Self-control. Remember that? Is the very best way to go. And we used to have this song with the kids when they were little, but as they've gotten older, we've started noticing that is the issue, is teaching them how to have self-control. So a lot of it from 13 to 18 is really about, you're still going to discipline. The discipline is going to look different. You're going to start seeing and knowing the things that really tap their heart, that are no longer, say, a spanking. They're no longer a swat on the hand, or they're no longer a timeout. So there may be things that you're going to do differently. You're going to start taking privileges away. You're going to find out what are the things that they love, that if they don't have, it begins to help them see their need for change.
Sure.
So but again, with that discipline, you're getting down to the why. Why did you do such and such?
Sure.
And beginning to help them see the self-discipline they need to put off that sin and the power of the gospel.
Right.
Not just simply, mommy told me no, therefore I don't need to do this anymore.
Right.
It's now, no, I need to not do this because something internal in me is wanting to sin against God. And that begins to be a different challenge. And obviously from 13 to 18, there's even a different, things are growing.
Right.
The goal is by the time they're 18 or whatever it is, whatever time of launch is that they're having some self-discipline on their own, where mom and dad don't have to discipline.
Sure.
One of the things about this is, even as I'm talking about it, it reminded me of a conversation I had with Bill years ago about the spheres of government. Spheres of government, God created us where we have self-government, meaning the first goal is that humans, would discipline themselves. The only reason why you need family government is because man can't discipline himself. The goal of family government is to help man, or humans, discipline themselves, right? So that really is why you have these different spheres, and why you have family discipline, is because the self-discipline is lacking.
So when you're talking about the discipline, though, I mean, from 6 to 12, we're taking toys away, we're minimizing TV time and that kind of thing. How are we disciplining the teens? Is it going past? Now the toy is a cell phone. I mean, what does that stuff look?
Yeah, I think it's all those things. I mean, I think it's anything that that is tapping your kid's heart. So an example would be, we have children that if we were to take away game time, that would really affect them. If I took
video game or on the ball field, taking
both, or even a game with a family.
Yeah.
We've had, I think we even shared a story a while back about, that if one of our children didn't, say, clean their room, that we were trying to teach them, if you don't work, you don't eat. That we came downstairs for dinner, they didn't have a play set until their room was clean. And it wasn't because we're trying to be mean. We're just trying to teach a principle. And certainly when your kids get to be 13 or 18 and they haven't developed that type of work ethic, you're in a world of hurt, you know? Yeah. So it is going to be different. Maybe time away from from friends that they are backing away from. Maybe it's something that they really, that they value. And what we say on those kind of things is, the thing that's like the end game. Like, okay, man, this would be the hardest thing to take from them.
Sure.
You don't start there.
Right.
You may start somewhere else to say to them, listen, this is leading up to some loss of privilege.
Yeah.
Because the older they get, the more you want them to take responsibility. They want to have responsibility. And the only way that to give them the freedom for that responsibility is if they're taking on small responsibilities and they're fulfilling them. So it's going to be different things for different families and different kids.
Yeah. But again, the goal in mind is to penetrate the heart with whatever that thing is,
right,
to teach them that underlying principle.
That's exactly right.
So then can you elaborate a little more? So how are you guys encouraging responsibility, independence, character growth, all these things that kind of come along with the teenage years?
Well, I mean, one of the things all that starts early. So like not like we mentioned before about having an if-then chart, but we also had a to-do list and a chore list and a blessing list for doing the right thing.
Sure.
So with our kids in particular, we tried to have a variety of projects or things that they were responsible for. And the more that they did those things, the more you gave them more freedom. So, I mean, we'll take, our youngest daughter, Bethany, who has a real love for animals, and she's really good at it. but we wanted to give her some responsibility with it. So she has always had a lamb project or whatever it may be. But as Bethany showed herself to be more responsible, more independent, we gave her more freedoms to do some things. So an example would be, I'm not an animal person. That's shocking to everybody. I grew up in the concrete jungle. We did have a 2.5 acre place where we had some horses, and we had a couple dogs, but a lot
of lambs and cows where you come from.
Not a lot. And so one of the things that when I've watched Bethany with her love for animals, she wanted to have her own flock of sheep. Well, on our place, we don't have everything fenced in everywhere, but I was comfortable giving her the freedom to do that because she'd taken on so much responsibility to do it on her own. So her independence is allowed for as she has shown the responsibility for what she's done and taken care of. But she also knows, and Bethany's we never had an issue with this, but if she doesn't fulfill those responsibilities, those freedoms are taken away.
Sure.
Now, each of our kids have had different things. With the boys, it may be they're chopping wood in the summer, or they're doing things to help the family with certain things. And when they're younger, we involved in all these family projects that we were doing together for that purpose. But then as time goes on, each of them shows different things. Nathan, for instance, loves motorcycles. I was not a motorcycle person, but I also recognized that Nathan was showing himself responsible. If he got crazy with anything, we'd pull the privilege back. And he knew that. But now that he's a 21-year-old man, he's got his own bike, so we've given him the freedom to do some things with that, and he buys and sells and does what he needs to. So each of our kids have something kind of similar. But we also know that with them taking on, when they show that they're responsible, we give them more independence and more freedom. We don't just throw them out there to the wolves and say, hey, figure it out.
Right.
No, we've said to them, here's some guidelines. Here's some things we want to see from you. And as you do this, then you're going to get more freedom. Now, we've never stated it that way.
Right.
We just observed it and watched it and then said, yeah, we want to encourage these kind of things.
Right.
Because each of them are bent a certain way, and we wanted to give more freedom.
With the independence thing, for Alina and I, a big thing with, I guess, that foundational work was making sure that we could trust our children, that they would never lie to us, that they would be
That's right.
Honest in the things that they were telling us. So then when it was time for them to start asking, hey, can we go and watch a movie with some friends? Who are you going to be with? How long are you going to go? What time you guys need to be picked up? Who else is going to be there? That kind of thing. And then, it only upon the understanding of saying, because we've seen this in you, we're allowing you to do this.
Yeah.
So there was kind of like a benefit and reward kind of action going on as well.
Yeah, and I think it's faith, like you said, it's like the faithful in the little things will give you more opportunity and freedom in the big things.
For sure.
And I just think that's kind of the way we've approached it as well with our kids. But all that starts younger.
Yep.
One of the challenges I think with parents is that we get into this teenage year and all of a sudden we start seeing, Sarah at 13 and she's showing, pre-teen, all these teenage stuff and attitudes and things. And then parents are now reacting to all that. When in our minds, it's like, well, that should have started way back sooner as you're training them. Now that they're 13, you've got to start targeting the heart with those things. And you're going to have to build relationally a little differently than you did previous.
Doesn't mean it's impossible.
No,
but you're kind of late to the party. But it's absolutely necessary that you begin now.
That's right. Yeah. There's a book I've mentioned before in the pulpit. It's called Practicing Affirmation. And in the book, the man talks about a story about a rebellious daughter.
Yep.
And one of the things that he did, I thought was fascinating, was he started speaking to this daughter about the way that she was made in the image of God and the way that he saw in her creativity and things that she enjoyed. And he used the things she enjoyed to get to her heart to build a relationship.
Yep.
And I think that was really insightful to me. And I think that parents, as you're observing your kids, you're going to see like this rebellious streak in a sense, or other things. But you want to be observing of how they're made in the image of God, so you can encourage that, but use that as well for an opportunity to build relationally with them.
Sure. So Dave, you were talking about the if-then chart, and then of course now, if you do these things, you'll get some more independence, you'll be rewarded in these kind of things. So how exactly, if you can describe it, how exactly did you set clear expectations while allowing the independence?
Yeah, I don't know. I just think with our kids, we have always been more concerned about character development.
Yeah.
Than we have been about like
performance.
Mm-hmm. So what do you mean by that?
So like, I don't know, things like faithfulness.
Okay.
doing the right thing
is way more important than how you play.
Yeah.
Or
Okay.
what you accomplished on the field or in the classroom.
Yeah.
Yeah. What kind of teammate are you? What are you coachable? Are you
Yeah.
humble? Are you, these kind of things. So,
did you do your very best on that test when you studied?
yeah. So we just been about character development and that kind of thing. So I don't know, like an example would be, we would never say, if you make an A on this test, we will give you thus and such.
Yeah.
Our response was always, well, you got to be on that test. You think you did your best on that one? Yeah, here's how I studied. Here's what happened. Okay.
Good job.
Good job. And we would move on. Now, but we've also been blessed with very strong-willed, hardworking kids that, for the most part, want to do their best.
Yeah.
For the most part.
Yeah.
But now there are moments like we have to say, we're noticing these things are slacking.
Mm-hmm.
And they would be character things that would be revealed in the performance. So an example is, hey, your room is becoming a disaster and we need this to be thought through. This is not being faithful to your mom in putting your clothes away that she's already washed for you. Or we'll say as our kids are getting older, like in that example, well, your clothes aren't getting washed is because you're not doing them.
Sure.
It's your job. You've got to learn to do these things.
Yep.
But, that's going to create, we're more about the character development, the honesty, the sincerity, the faithfulness, the heart level conversation, than we are about the performing piece.
Right.
We've never wanted to create a home where kids that say, let's put the facade up. Hi, we're nice. We're New Yorks. We're the pastor's people.
Yep.
We've always wanted to say, nope, the reality of us is we're sinful people who need Jesus really bad, and we want to live life that way. And we want our kids to develop a transparency about their lives. So when we see that in them, we're saying, okay, we're going to trust you.
Yep.
Now, there's moments that we, obviously, as parents, you're growing up and you're watching your kids, you're like, well, I just don't trust you with this thing yet.
Right.
With each of our kids, when they got to the driver's license time, it was like, honestly, I don't know if I trust you to have a vehicle.
Right.
Because of where you're at right now.
Because of what we've seen here and
what
there.
we've seen. And so that we've had to watch them and have them prove, in a sense, that their character is such that they're going to be able to handle this.
Yep. Now, for our listeners out there, and they're listening to this, and they're thinking, one kid, being the kind of the what you've done for one kid will work for the next one. How vital is it for you to understand the differences in your kids, especially your teens? You brought up the grade thing. I know for one of my kids, if it's anything sub an A, something went wrong there. Mm-hmm. And then the other one, if they get like a B, I'm like, way to go. Uh-huh. So again, how vital is it for you to understand the differences in them and to be able to attack the hard issues?
Well, it's critical. They're made in the image of God. They're diverse. They're different. And they're, I don't know the word I use, like their leanings are different.
Their giftings
from God are different. Like you just take our two boys in particular. Nathan is more mechanical. It's more he puts things together really well like that. Caleb is much more relational in that dynamic, and he doesn't think through things like that. Now, some of he's younger too, but they just have two different gifts, two different ways of seeing things. And we got to raise one way and one another way, in a sense, with the same guardrails of character development and Christ-centeredness.
The same biblical framework.
But just two different humans.
Yep.
I would say this too, expectations would be different.
Right. I'm wondering. So how do you still allow things to be fair, or do you?
Well, again, it's like, we can think of some examples with our own girls. We have one that's a voracious reader that loves debate, would be rousing in it. Another one does not enjoy reading, would much rather serve and give of her time, and is incredibly gifted in some other areas. Mm-hmm. So our expectations were hard work, humility, faithfulness, goodness, all these things. Yeah. In those areas. So one is going to have a particular bent on some things that we're going to expect these character traits. It was the same in the other one, but just in the same character traits.
Yeah.
They're just doing something totally different. but helping them then appreciate those differences in one another and us appreciating their differences.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah. We have to be able to encourage the way that God has made them in the right biblical ways.
Yes.
Sure. So even in these teenager years, you're starting to tackle more of the outside influences, and then just how our sin kind of just surrounds that and just kind of engulfs that, if you will. So now you're taking on conversations about things that some of the things that their friends are doing, or things that they've seen on TV, or even just getting into the nitty gritty about dating, sex, alcohol, you name it. How are you able to have those tough conversations with your teens with still giving them grace and wisdom?
Having meaningful conversations all the time. So, before your kids are driving, you're driving in the car and just talking about where their heart is and what they're thinking about, and having a lot of dialogue and pointing them to Christ, bringing out the principles of Scripture that can lead them in the right direction. So you're not always talking about big decisions, but teenagers have a lot going on in their head, and talking to them about those things and having a conversation that they can ask you questions and you can ask them questions. Those are all really important in helping them to develop their character, getting them grounded in scriptural, basing what they believe in the scriptures, and all that is meaningful conversations all the time.
Mm-hmm. And that's even something that in a different podcast you've mentioned was that foundational piece, and even you were having those kind of conversations, giving what were you thinking about in this one? And you talked about, are you feeling this way? Are you feeling that way? So even that's at a small age, but you're then now capitalizing on that.
Well, I think that's exactly what you're talking about. Is like, we wanted to have these, we wanted to have where there was no topic off conversation.
Sure.
That our kids just felt comfortable talking to us as friends.
Again, everything's on the table.
Everything's on the table. And even to have where you could have the awkward conversation, but it wasn't awkward. It was like, hey, I'm your dad and I got to ask you about this.
Yep.
And, my boys or my girls would go, yeah, I get it. Yep. And I know that you love me, and that's why we're having the question and having the dialogue. But you build all that into it.
Yeah.
And Jill nailed it. Is I think that one of the things that I think as parents that we miss is, and I know I do this in my own life, we get busy. We love music. We love our podcast. We love our audiobooks, whatever it may be. We love our TV shows. And we get home, we're tired. We turn something on.
Yep.
Our kids are sitting right next to us, or they're not. They're in the other room. And they're starting to talk, and we're too tuned into something else.
Yeah, dialed out.
Yep. And, it's funny, you made the comment you made a minute ago about, they have all these voices in their heads and the whole thing.
Yeah.
And I thought, actually the problem for probably me, and I think for probably most parents, I have more voices in my own head. And I have more distractions that are coming at me.
As long as they don't talk back.
Right. That then when my kid is going, hey, I might want to talk to you about something.
Yeah.
Or they don't actually say that. They just start talking. And then suddenly you're like, whoa, we're in the middle of this.
Right.
I know Jill and I have talked about this too. Like when Caleb started driving, one of the things I missed was I drove him to school every day.
Yeah.
And we had great conversation. He would just dump his heart out. So I would never, on our ride to town, I'd never turn on anything unless he'd say, hey, can we listen to this podcast? I would just let him drive and I'd sit and listen.
Yeah.
And he'd ask questions and we'd talk. And I know Jill had the same thing with our other kids. And that's just invaluable moments. I think that's one reason why Jill loves playing board games with our kids so much is because it's just in those board game moments, all of a sudden they just start talking.
Yeah. Well, even one thing that we've been trying to stay faithful to is just the importance of just a family dinner. Just that, no, we're not going to put on a movie or something and grab a bite. No, we're actually going to have some intentional time together. No cell phones around, no movies, nothing. We're just going to have a conversation, and hopefully, and that usually leads to us talking about something important, you know, not so incredibly deep, but something important.
Yeah.
I thought when you brought up the podcast and everything, I thought where you were going to go is talking about how easy it is to not have the conversation with your child yourself, but just to kind of pass on this resource to them, you know, and be like, here you go, figure it out.
Yeah, I do agree with that. I think that, there's a load of resources on that, but I think that the kid wants to have the conversation with mom and dad.
Sure.
And and that's the other piece. Like we've wrestled through the years too, like these hard, awkward conversations. Do we have these with our kids? And our question has been, well, who else do we want to have
100%
this with them?
Yep.
Now, are there other people that could help come alongside? Sure.
Supplement.
Yeah. But, we want to talk with our kids about the hard things of life. Especially as our kids have gotten older. We have 3 that are older than 21, so they're older in drinking age and all those things. Yep. We wanted to have all those convictions and things talked about, as well as like even modeled in front of them, so that they could understand what this looked like. We've always been just haven't thought very well about people that say, let's say they're a social drinker, but they kind of say to themselves, I'm going to hide it from my kids.
Right.
Our theory was, if you're going to do something publicly, then do it with your kids. And that way they can observe, they can watch, they can see convictions, they can understand how mom and dad operate. And they don't see it as something sinister or evil. They just see it as just another part of life.
For sure.
It's important to be able to sit down at a family dinner or even individually with your kids. And, we are observers. We observe things in their life. And if it's appropriate to have the conversation at the family table, you say that, hey, let's talk about, this issue that's coming up in our world today. And what do we think about this? Yep. And it's not us sitting down and lecturing our children and giving them the information that they need to file away. No, it's a discussion so that they're involved and they're thinking it through, and we can say, okay, that's an interesting point. Why would you say that? And where does that come from? Where does the Bible back you up in that, in the way you're thinking?
Right.
So that it's a productive conversation that helps them solidify where they are.
Yeah, that's really good. I mean, you've talked about training sessions at a young age. That's kind of a training session for the teenage age.
Yes.
You know, it's just like, here's a world issue, or here's a societal issue, whatever have you. And yet, how would you deal with this in this situation? Or what are you thinking of here? How is that rooted in the gospel? How is that rooted in the word?
Yeah, let me give an example of that. And I think Chris and Jamie Guasafero did a fantastic job with their boys about this. They had a kind of a can that had 101 topics in it,
Oh, yeah.
And they would just randomly have the boys pull out a topic. It could be anything like, talk to me about credit cards.
Yeah.
It could be, how do I approach a girl's dad about dating her?
Yep.
It could be all these various topics, right? Yep. And they just went through these topics.
Yep.
And I mean, it was so inspiring to think, man, these are the kind of things they're talking about. Yeah. And it's just anything.
And it's such a broad take on everything. I mean, how many parents literally sit down and say, man, I really kind of need to teach my kid how to budget.
Yes.
Yeah. I need to teach my kid, they picked up a job. We should probably talk about tithing.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, just all these topics that you have to be intentional about that.
Well, and like we've said before in other podcasts, is like your kids are going to get it somewhere.
Yep.
Or they're going to get it from their own understanding of things, and it's generally sinful or worldly directed.
Yeah.
And I think it's important for us to get on the front end of those kind of conversations on any topic.
Yep.
But that does take intentionality. Now with teenagers, and I think what we found with teenagers is it's not nearly as planned as you want it to be. Right. So with teenagers, it's in this time of life where they're busy, they got friends, they got all this stuff going on, and you're driving them somewhere, you're with them in somewhere, or you're having a family dinner, and you've got to allow the space in your world and your time that your kids sit down in there and you just have a dialogue about things.
Sure.
Now we'll have something similar, like we're planning a trip here soon, and we've sat all our kids and said we're gonna have a meeting to talk about this issue. Mm-hmm. But more likely not, it's just going to be spontaneous. You're going to say something. Oh,
I was going to say it could happen when you don't want it to happen, and that's what you have to be prepared for. That selfless, super patient parenting, where
flexibility.
When you're tired, it's 10 o'clock at night, and they get home from a sports game or hanging out with their friends at a birthday party, and all of a sudden they want to talk.
Yeah,
you better put your big girl pants on and say, okay, now's the time, because they're ready, and we're going to have a dialogue here, and this could go a while. But I want to be engaging in that.
Yeah. you're going to suffer for the gospel.
Oh, man.
That's right.
She's way better than I am. I'm like, can we shut the door and
Can
light up?
we pick this up at like 8 o'clock tomorrow?
I know. What are we doing?
They might not be ready to talk at 8 o'clock in the morning.
Sure.
And they got a whole bunch of things they got to do in the morning and get off for work or whatever,
100%.
school. And we had to be ready.
Yep.
We had to be ready all the time.
Yep. So we talked about, you just said, talking about there's nothing that's off the table, discussion-wise. What are some of those topics, that you're introducing to your children at the teen age, that you've been putting off when they were little?
Oh, man.
We didn't put off those things when they were little. We brought all the things to the table in appropriate.
So like the big one that comes to
age.
my mind, birds and the bees.
Right.
How do you handle that?
Well, for us, we were lucky to live on a ranch. So we had cattle out front all the time. And our kids are like, what's going on out there? We went, well, let's talk about that.
They're making babies.
So they're making babies. And so we had it. So we talked about those things.
Yep.
We talked about it age appropriate.
Yep.
And then as they got older, obviously you're going to talk about it a little more and you're going to do it more privately with them on certain things.
Although if it was in the Bible.
It was in the Bible, we covered it.
Yeah.
So we'd be reading along in Proverbs and it'd be like the woman of the night. And, and I'd say, who is the woman of the night? And the kids would be like, and the girls who are older would be like, Dad, please don't. I'd say, okay, well, let's talk about the woman of the night. And we'd address that issue. Or a concubine or whatever. We would talk about these things because it's in the Bible.
Right.
And it gave us the freedom to say, this is what the Bible means by this. And talk with our kids openly about these things. We started that when they were younger. But that way, then when we got older, I could say, let's say to my boys as an example, we would sit down when they were starting to mature and go through puberty and talk about certain things and just say, okay, there's some things that are going to start changing in your body and we need to talk about that. And just as a dad, and they would kind of go, oh, that's kind of gross. And but the thing was, it was never like it's gross because it's coming from you.
Right.
It's just gross because it was gross.
Yeah.
So, but we try to build that with our friendship. Jill would say to me, I remember one time with one of the kids, she said, it's probably time to have that conversation. I was like, yeah, it's good. Why didn't you think about that? Are they that old now?
Yeah.
And so I was more surprised by it. They're old enough rather than that. So I think you just start those conversations early. I would say the same thing about dating. We started early with our kids. Like, you'd go into a situation where little Sarah walks in the room. She's 4 years old. And there's another little boy there. And they go, oh, that's your little boyfriend?
Yeah, right.
And we'd just say things like, no, that's not her boyfriend. And we would make that kind of comment and then start talking to our girls in particular. Hey, daddy's the one that's a guardian of your heart. Daddy's the one that young boys need to talk to before they talk to you. And all these various things. We'd do the same thing with our sons. But we did all that younger, playful, if you will. And then as they got older, it became more like, okay, let's talk about these. But we've been teaching you in these principles all these years.
What is my role?
What makes me nervous is parents wait to talk about dating till their kids are dating.
Yeah.
And it's like, whoa, you're behind the 8 ball here.
Right.
There's no ground rules set.
No.
There's no expectation of where, as a family, you feel like that should go.
Or modesty. Right. They don't talk about modesty with any of their kids till it's time now. All of a sudden, summer, and their daughter's 15. They suddenly realize, oh my word, my daughter's gone through puberty. What's happened? And they're like, well, have you talked about modesty?
We can't find a swimsuit anywhere.
Right, exactly. And have you had that discussion? Well, no, that'd be weird and awkward. We're like, well, no, actually, it wouldn't be if you started that.
Yeah.
And that, I say, if you're a young parent, you got young kids, then just start introducing some things to them.
Yeah.
If you're a parent that you got kids already in that age bracket, I'd say have the conversation.
Yeah.
It is going to be awkward because you haven't had it, but start it and try to get it out of the awkward phase.
Yeah.
And the other thing I'd say is get rid of the fear. The fear is, oh my word, if I start talking to them now, they're going to become Romeo and Juliet with this forbidden love.
Right.
And you're like, no, actually, if you started the conversation now, your kid probably appreciate it.
Yeah.
And they probably go, man, Dad, I didn't even know you cared, honestly.
And guess what? That's inevitable.
Oh, yeah.
It's happening whether you like it or not.
I'll tell you one of the most profound things I ever watched. This is back almost 35 years ago. I was living in Dallas. There was an episode on the nightly news about teenage girls who've gotten pregnant. And one of the questions was asked, what is the thing you wish your parents would have done more of? And one of the girls said, I wish my parents would have said, you never should be dating that guy.
Yeah.
Or I wish my dad would have given me a hug.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh my word, they are talking about biblical principles right here.
Yep.
And these poor girls are feeling like they were left out by their
And those
parents.
foundational pieces.
And they were just foundational things where parents could have said no, and they didn't because of fear.
Yep.
And I just think, man, moms and dads, if you're out there, it's okay now, even as a teenager, to sit with your kid and say, honey, I got to talk to you about this.
Yep.
I have a burden about I'm worried about this,
Yep.
and have the open conversation with them. I just think we don't do it enough.
Yeah.
I think if the conversation hasn't happened and they're already in that place, then as parents, there needs to be a point of repentance.
Yes.
Repentance to the Lord that we have failed to talk about these things or address them or set parameters. And then repentance to our children to say, I'm sorry, I haven't spoken to you about this. And I recognize that I've failed. And so we want to start from here forward. Yeah, it might be awkward. Those conversations when they're 10, that they're starting to ask about the birds and the bees or all those questions. Yeah, you may feel awkward in your heart, but you don't have to make it awkward.
Yes.
Sure.
My kids asked me some pretty astonishing questions and I'd be like, oh boy, okay, Lord, I need help here because I don't want to make this weird.
Yep.
I could make it weird by just my face alone.
Yeah.
And I don't want to make it weird, so give me wisdom.
Yes.
And approaching it from a biblical perspective and answering those questions is so important because if I make a huge deal about it and I embarrass them and make it awkward, the next time they have a question that they're not so sure about, they're going to go to somebody else.
Right, for sure. Yeah, you really do bring out the importance of not just the awkwardness that they can present you, but how you even start the conversation off to begin with. With our kids, again, everything was on the table, and it was just if any topic came up, it was just like, this is what we do. This is just simply what we do, and I'll never forget it. I don't think he would care if I shared this, but I remember having the talk with Emerson. And then, so we did the whole thing. And then at the end of it, he's just like, Dad, that was kind of weird. I was just like, yeah, it was. And we moved on.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
That's what you do. Yeah.
And that's just what you do. So kind of a sidebar on that one. Dave, you were talking about other people coming in to influence, in a good way. So how does it look like teenage years? Do your kids go and ask for somebody to disciple them, a mentor? When does that teacher or that coach or that family friend actually become involved into supplementing that parental instruction?
Yeah, I mean, I know early on when we first had Hannah, we were the ideal parents. We were going to have this idealistic little world, and she's going to know Latin by the time she's 6, and she's going to be debating Socrates, and
she's going to be catechized by 12.
Yes, and then sin entered the world, and it got challenging, and life was hard. Not because she was, but because we were parents, and we begin to realize that there's a realism about this, and we're not the only ones. And there really is the truth to the fact that the church is involved. We were just at a wedding this last weekend for Aaron B. Weckley, and I've been able to coach all 3 of those boys.
Congratulations to Aaron, by the way.
I know, it's so exciting. He's married a great gal. Taylor's wonderful. But Seth made an interesting comment at the rehearsal, and I made a comment to Jill, and I thought it was really a great comment. And actually, it was at the wedding. He said, some say it takes a village to raise a child. He said, but we actually think it takes a church. And he said, so here's what we found. Love Jesus, surround yourself with people who love Jesus, and get them around your kids.
Yeah. And
I was like, that is a great statement.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And it really was a great statement. And when I watched and observed like that wedding that day in particular, there's 2 kids, and Taylor didn't grow up here. She grew up in Dallas, wonderful family, surrounded her with godly people.
Yep.
And those people were doting on her, loving her, and celebrating this wedding. And I just think you see the fruit of that in that situation. But I think we've seen it as well. The privilege of raising our kids in this church with people that love them, and people that have volunteered their time to our kids.
Yep.
To say, hey man, I really do value Caleb, or I value Nathan. Would you mind if I spent some extra time with them and just got to know him? And I'm like, man, have at it.
Yeah.
And we haven't had one situation where they've said something that we would not agree with or not like. We have had maybe 1 or 2 situations where we would say, hey, probably not in this venue right now, if that'd be okay. But they've been responsive.
Yeah.
And so I think it's invaluable.
Yep.
You can't do it alone.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned with Nathan his love for motorcycles, and you're not a motorcycle guy.
Yeah.
Well, there's motorcycle guys in our church.
Yeah. Well, I can also tell you that Nathan's love for his grandfather, which was Jill's dad, and which is Jill's dad, and they've developed a unique relationship. Nathan regularly talked to his grandfather about Jesus, and they had a great friendship out of that, and it was a wonderful thing. And Nathan uses the motorcycles now for the sake of the gospel.
For sure.
Doing things with his friends.
For sure.
So yes, you're exactly right. I just think it takes a group of people. We can't think. I mean, I can think of people who have invested in our girls' lives that I could name them all in my own mind right now, and just how grateful we are for the way they've shaped our kids. But having those kind of mentors around them is invaluable.
Yeah. So, something as a young parent, all you want to do is control a lot of the environments, who they're hanging out with, teaching them things in a safeguarded way. But now you're with the teens. They're out driving. They're with your friends. They're out in the real world. What is the role of consequences in natural life lessons? How does that come into play now?
That's a great question.
I was thinking about this earlier today, and when you go bowling, it's really, whether you're a good bowler or a bad bowler, you're going to end up in the ditch sometimes, and you're going to get 0, right? But if you always put up the bumpers on the side, the kid bumpers, and bumpers keep you on the straight path all the time, and you hit the pin and you score points or whatever, you're never going to really learn how to bowl.
That's right.
And I think of it that way. It is good for us to have trials, and it is good for us to fail.
Yes.
And at home with your teenagers and parents who love you is a perfect opportunity to have trials and fail.
Yes.
Because we love our kids. We're going to encourage them to make right choices, make right decisions. Some things, obviously, we would put our foot down and say, you're not doing that while you live in our home or whatever. But, some of these smaller decisions that they want to choose, I want to go out and spend, all this money I've raised, and I want to buy this, brand new motorcycle or this whatever toy that they want. And you see the potential for, hardships financially for what their goals are or whatever. But that is a good place to say, okay, here are the principles for spending, biblical principles for spending. Here's what we think. What do you think? What's going into helping you make this decision? And then you take the bumpers down and they make that decision. They may crash and burn. They may go in the ditch and score 0 points. They may lose all that money in this little investment that they've made, but it's a good place to fail and learn. And that is so important. We cannot be a cushion or a bumper around our teenagers so that they never fail.
Yeah. That's really helpful. I'm reminded of one of the quotes from a guy I listened to, and he's always talking about teaching your kids dangerous things in safe places. Yep. And that's exactly what you're getting at.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I can think of multiple examples where we just had to let our kids fail,
crash and burn. Yeah.
And it was hard to watch because, you're left praying.
Yep.
But it was the best thing for them. And especially as they got older, I tell you what's hard about parenting adults is that you're no longer the control. You can't just, you can't just say, here's the guardrails, don't do it.
Yeah.
You can say, I don't know, here's the wisdom. And then they go, okay, thanks, Dad. Yep. And then they're off on their own. And you're like, I hope this turns out well.
No kidding.
And so, but you, at the same time, you've got to trust in the providence and the sovereignty of God in their lives, and He's going to be at work in them.
Yep. I guess it's not all too differently than, a kid, messing around with something that's going to give them an owie, and you just say, well, they've got to learn. So we told them 5 or 6 times over this thing. All right. Yeah. That fireplace got a little hot there, didn't it?
Yeah. I think even in that, like you think, okay, but the difference of that, say, okay, then touching something hot that, isn't going to give them a 3rd-degree burn. Yeah. Versus letting them play with an armed gun. Yeah, for sure. A gun that's loaded. Yeah. There's those boundaries that you go, there's just some things we're not going to allow. Sure. But then there's other things you go, you know what? This is going to be for them. When one of our kids was little or younger, we'll give it away, but he enjoyed riding 4-wheelers, and he rode a 4-wheeler up to the top of a hill one time, couldn't get it down, and suddenly realized, well, the 4-wheeler went tumbling down that mountainside. Thank God he wasn't on it. Yep. And then secondly, we made him pay every dime of it back to get it fixed. Yeah, right. And it was a costly mistake. Yep. But we said, this is what you're going to learn to do. Well, what did he learn? He learned responsibility. He learned hard work. He learned the value of a dollar. He, all these things that were important to him.
Respecting other people's property.
Yeah, right. I mean, it was things that was really hard.
Yep.
But it was like, but this is what we have to do. And I remember the look on his face when we said, it's going to be this much money. And he was like, oh my word.
What am I going to do?
Yeah.
Yep.
And he didn't have a job.
Yep.
He had to go work for it. He had to figure it out. He had to learn to hustle.
Yep.
And it's like, that's an invaluable lesson that he'll never forget.
But that's training. That's a training session for life.
That's
you know?
right.
Again, it's just, and I think as parents, you so badly just want to protect it or just take away whatever pain or turmoil that your kids are having, and yet you have to remind yourself, God even uses trials for us to mold us into the people that He wishes us to become.
That's exactly right.
And nothing changes that with your children.
No, it doesn't.
We don't want to cut short the work of God by
That's a good
stopping
point.
the trial
Sure,
That's a good point.
that God has planned for them in their life.
that's
Yes.
great.
Shame on me if I do that.
Yeah,
Yeah. That's like, we don't let endurance have its full effect. As James 1 says, we step in to stop it short because we don't like the pain. When the pain may be the very thing that the Lord's doing to produce something in them. And if we're not careful, we cut it short, and it's dangerous to do that.
100%. Yep.
It's hard.
But as they go through that, you're not necessarily coming in to take away the pain, but you're going to help them through it.
Right.
Oh,
with
absolutely.
the grace and wisdom that
Yeah. An example that comes to my mind is like we've had our kids at a Christian school here in town, and which is UVC, and we love it, and have always thought the world of the people that are there. And there have been some moments where we thought maybe that a discipline situation or whatever might have been handled a little unjustly. But we had our kids do two things. Whenever we had them make the appeal, we had them go speak to what that was right. We only entered into the picture after we had told them, this is your responsibility.
Sure.
And once they did the responsibility and they had done what they needed to do, then it went to family. And mom and dad saying, okay, now we're partnering with this school, so let's enter into this world. Now, then when the administration would say, no, this is still our discipline, then we're out. But it wasn't, but our kids still had to go through the discipline. We're just saying that's part of it. That's the nature of the beast. And so I think it's easy to step in as a parent. Then you get all mad. You decide you're going to cut something short.
Sure.
But what if that's the best thing for your kid? You need to trust that the Lord's involved in that.
Yeah. With kind of going a different direction here, we kind of discussed about you're building this relationship, but we're also trying to teach discipline and give instruction. And then, we're starting to let there's more independence going on. There's more responsibility. How do we balance that discipline while still building that relationship that's going to turn into that Paul and Timothy down the road?
Well, discipline is birthed out of love. It has to be. I mean, that's so. I can tell you. I mean, I was talking to one of my kids about this recently about something. I said, why we made this decision, right? And they said, yeah, it's because you love me, right? I don't want them to think that discipline is punitive. That's just because we got to get something off our back.
Right.
I want them to see this is for your good. We love you too much to allow this to go on. And they understand that.
And I think another aspect of that is respect. We have a lot more respect with our children when we discipline them or when we do what we say we're going to do.
Yeah, we follow through.
That long term builds so much respect, and your friendship in later years is built, and that is a cornerstone of your friendship is respect. Respect for the fact that that we have made choices to do things God's way, and we're going to stick to that. And we've made a choice to hold you to a standard, and we're going to stick to that. We're not going to waver from that standard because it's too hard, or maybe we change our mind for some reason, or begging, or whatever it may be. So I think that I agree with David, and to add to that, respect in the relationship where they respect us, and then we also respect them in the choices that they're learning to make and the opinions that they have and where they're coming from and things like that.
Because it's already been established that the root of all of that is because we love each other.
Right.
This is why we're doing this. A lot of parents will find themselves in situations where they're giving the instruction that they thought that they needed themselves instead of what they actually did at that particular age. What would you say to the parent that's struggling with kind of the hypocrisy of parenting when it comes to, they know how much of a knucklehead they were at 16, 17, now here I'm trying to get my own children to do something completely opposite than what I did. What do you say to those folks?
Well, I can tell you from experience. I mean, I was the guy that dated, and I did all kinds of things in high school that I regret. I mean, it's sickening to my heart. And I ask, do I want my kids to have the same regret? Well, the answer is no. So if I don't, then I better instruct them, and I better teach them, and I better hold them accountable. And I've told my kids often, there's a way better way to live than the way your dad did when he was younger. And I want you to see the realities of it. And
we're honest about our own sin.
Yeah, I'm very honest about my past, very honest about my own sin, and I don't want them to ever be astonished by that. So I have no issues at all. You know, I hear parents say, well, I sowed my wild oats, therefore my kid needs to go sow theirs.
Yeah, right.
I'm like, well, yeah, but what did that do for you?
Right.
It hurt others. It hurt you. It left a trail of tears somewhere. Do you want that for your kid?
Right.
No, I don't. What I want for my kid is God's best for their life, and for them to be filled with joy and purity and faithfulness and all these things for all their days.
Yeah.
So my thinking on that is, you may think it's hypocritical. It's actually not, because the Apostle Paul himself said he murdered Christians.
Yeah.
So because he murdered Christians didn't keep him from saying, hey, don't murder.
Right.
He did it because he knew the grief that it caused him and others and families. And so I think we just have to, what is God's way for our families and our kids? And you instruct that, knowing that you blew it most of the time.
Yeah, Paul's a good one. I mean, here you have a guy who's instructing on, essentially how to live your life as Christ. And he's the one that would say, when it comes to sinners, there is no greater than I. Yes.
He says, hey, look what I did.
Yeah.
Look at the consequences that it gave me, and don't do what I did.
Don't do what I did.
Yep. For Alina and I, we always did the stupid, smart, and wise thing. It's just like, all right, guys, what is the difference between stupid, smart, and wise? Stupid people don't learn from their mistakes. Yep. Smart people learn from their mistakes. Wise people learn from the mistakes of others.
That's exactly right. Yeah, Proverbs says the fool learns from his own experience, and the wise man learns from the instruction of others.
100%.
And so, I don't know. I was the fool.
Yep.
And I just don't want my kids to be that.
Yep.
Now I can't keep them from having to experience hard things.
Sure.
But my hope is I can give them some wisdom from what I went through
to better prepare.
Yeah, to better prepare.
Yep.
Yeah. Let me just say something about that too. And it just kind of, as Joel's talking, it really, I think too that one of the aspects that we as parents with our teenagers that we start missing is, when they're little, we're snuggling, we're hugging. I mean, we hug them, we show affection.
Yep.
Physical affection. When they get older, we start thinking that needs to back off because they're embarrassed or whatever it may be.
Yeah, right.
I do think that physical touch in an affection, a hug, a hand on the shoulder, helps our kids navigate through our affection for them. I think that when they get older, our tendency is they don't want us, they're embarrassed, whatever it may be. And there's moments when we don't want to embarrass them on they're in public or whatever. But we have just tried to say to our kids, look, we love you. We are going to show that by our physical touch for you because we want to hug you and care about you. And even in our discipline, there's been times I've sat with my sons on the couch, put my arm around them with tears in my eyes, saying, son, this is why I've got to do what I got to do. And I think you know that.
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah, Dad, I know. And we'll embrace and hug and cry and all those things. And it's important because we don't want our kids to think that our discipline is coming out of our anger at them.
Sure.
No, it's coming from because we love you so deeply. And this is a sin against God.
A loving duty.
Yes. Yeah. And it hurts. It hurts us. I mean, it's hard. So I think that's important to keep that in mind. Yeah. I think fathers to daughters in particular, mothers to sons, that I think those things matter.
Yep. And when you have that foundation of love and respect, one of the greatest memories I have when Nathan was a junior in high school, I showed up at the school. I don't remember why. I had some things I had to drop off or something like that. And he saw me there. And I wasn't there to see him or give him anything or anything like that. And he comes out of his classroom. It was in between, and he was in weight training, and the teacher was there, a whole bunch of his buddies, and he's like, "Mumsy!" And he comes over and he gives me a big old hug, and he kissed me on the forehead, and I'm like, this is the greatest moment ever. He's not embarrassed that I am his mother. And, I discipline him. I call him on things. I tell him, hey, I think you're being a fool or whatever. But there's also that encouragement there where I am so proud of the man you're becoming and what God is doing in your life. And these are the things, and that moment to me was a culmination of all that, the discipline, the love, the encouragement, and he wasn't embarrassed. I went away and I was like, oh, Lord Jesus, thank you.
It's the best ever.
I've come to realize I got to really step up my game if I want to embarrass my kids these days.
Yeah.
If I go into the classroom and I'll be like, to Justice or whatever, be like, baby bee, Pookie, come here. They're just like, yeah, that's my dad. I got to go.
Exactly.
They're just like, yeah, that's just who he is.
Yeah.
Oh man, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know how to upgrade from that. So let's wrap things up with you guys here, Dave and Jill. If you had one thing to say to a parent teen, or a parent of a teenager, what would that piece of advice be?
I would say, first, pray. But listen to what they have to say. Involve them in conversation. Don't just tell them or lecture them. Have a discussion. Open God's word together and say, okay, you asked me about this. Let's open it. Let's study together. You may know the answer. You may not know the answer. It doesn't matter. Involve them. Let them feel like what they have to say matters.
Yeah, you're inviting them into your world.
Yes, and you're inviting them to think broadly, to think biblically, to start making decisions according to God's word, and you're helping to direct that conversation. So I would say, talk and listen and love Jesus together.
Yeah, I'd say the same thing at the end, is just love your spouse, love Christ, and love your kids. And, I remind myself of this as often as I can, to be patient with my kids as Christ has been patient with me.
Yeah. Amen. Well, there you have it. Disciplining teenagers without completely losing your mind. If you've made it this far, congratulations. You deserve a trophy, or at least a quiet moment to yourself. Just remember, even when they think they don't need you, they do. Stay patient, stay prayerful, and when all else fails, just unplug the Wi-Fi. Thanks for tuning in. Be sure to subscribe because we've got more episodes coming on young adults. Yes, they still need parenting too. Until next time, worship, fellowship, grow, and serve. Thanks for joining us for another episode of CLF Conversations, where we grow in Christ, one conversation at a time.